The gavel slammed down, and silence fell like a heavy curtain. Every creak of the wooden benches seemed to echo in the stillness that followed. The judge's voice had not yet spoken the verdict, but the air inside the room felt thick, as if everyone was holding the same anxious breath. Courtrooms had their own kind of gravity, one that could pull even the proudest person into a place of vulnerability. At the center table sat Daniel Brooks, a tall man whose broad shoulders now seemed hunched under an invisible weight. He was flanked by his 4 wives, Sarah, Miriam, Leah, and Joy. Their hands rested close together on the polished oak surface, fingers brushing now and then in quiet comfort. Daniel's hands, however, wouldn't stop trembling. Just months ago, he had been living what he often called a beautiful, united life in the quiet town of Riverview. The mornings had been filled with the clatter of breakfast plates, the chatter of children, and the comforting smell of coffee drifting through the hallways of their farmhouse. To outsiders, their way of life seemed unconventional. To them, it was simply family. But all of that had changed the day a folded paper slid into his hands. A formal court summons. The state was charging him with breaking marriage laws. The accusation was simple on paper but explosive in reality. Daniel had more than one wife. In Daniel's mind, love should never be limited by a signature or a government seal. He believed every marriage in his home was a willing, joyful choice. But the law didn't see it that way. And now the judge's decision would determine whether the Brooks family could remain under one roof or be forced apart in the name of legal compliance. Rows of journalists and photographers crowded the back of the room, their cameras clicking like distant thunder. Reporters' pens scratched furiously against notepads. On social media, hashtags about the case had been trending for weeks. Some people saw Daniel as a man fighting for love. Others saw him as someone defying the law for selfish reasons. But Daniel wasn't looking at the crowd, the flashing lights, or the reporters who whispered between themselves. His eyes stayed fixed on one small figure in the front row, his youngest daughter, no more than 7 years old. She sat between her mother Sarah and her sister, clutching her mother's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her wide eyes locked on him, and in that moment, Daniel knew this wasn't just about winning or losing in court. This was about the future of his family. Daniel Brooks had been negotiating with his neighbor, Mr. Allen, about where the property line really ended. It started as a civil disagreement, a few heated words over coffee mugs at the end of a dusty driveway. But things escalated quickly. One afternoon, Daniel came home to find Mr. Allen standing on his porch, a smirk on his face and a thin folder under his arm. A week later, Daniel understood why. Blue and red lights lit up the sleepy street outside the Brooks farmhouse one early morning. It was the kind of still, golden morning where the air smells like wet grass and dew. But instead of the sound of roosters or children laughing, there was the crunch of police boots on gravel. Sarah answered the door first, still wearing her faded floral robe, her hair in a loose braid. The officer at the front didn't look cruel, but his voice was firm as he handed over a thick envelope. When Daniel tore it open, the first word that caught his eye was written in bold black letters across the top: "Bagamy." At first he laughed, a short, almost disbelieving chuckle. "There's been a mistake," he told the officers. "My family isn't doing anything wrong. We've lived this way for years without trouble." But the officer's eyes didn't change. He simply said, "Sir, you'll need to read the full notice. You're expected in court within 30 days. Daniel sat at the kitchen table for hours, the papers spread out before him. Each sheet seemed colder than the last. Lists of accusations, legal codes he didn't fully understand, and the signature of a state prosecutor. When he read their words aloud, the room seemed to tighten around him. Manipulated vulnerable women, mocked the legal institution of marriage. It was like being painted as a stranger in his own life. The accusations hurt, but what stung more was how quickly the media picked up the story. Local reporters parked vans down the road, their long camera lenses pointed toward the farmhouse. News headlines didn't say "Devoted Family Faces Legal Challenge." They said, "Illegal Marriages Discovered in Rural Riverview." The Brooks women, Sarah, Miriam, Leah, and Joy, tried to set the record straight. When a reporter shoved a microphone toward Sarah, she looked straight into the camera and said firmly, "We are not victims. We are a family." But every time they spoke, it seemed their words were trimmed, twisted, and fed back to the public with an angle that made them sound defensive, almost guilty. And as the days passed, Daniel realized something chilling. The trial in the courtroom hadn't even started yet. But in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already forming. From the moment the bailiff called, "All rise," the air felt heavier. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a battlefield, and every word spoken could wound or heal. Daniel Brooks sat at the defendant's table, his lawyer Mark Hughes. Beside him, across the room, the state's prosecutor, Miss Reynolds, stood poised like a chess master, her hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes sharp as glass. She began with precision, her voice slicing through the air as she laid out documents in neat, deliberate stacks. "Your Honor," she said, "what we have here is not a misunderstanding. It is a deliberate violation of state marriage law." One by one she lifted the papers and read from them. Sarah's marriage certificate, Miriam's date of arrival in the family, Leah's legal name change, and the bank account statements showing the shared financial life of all four wives. Her every word was designed to tighten the noose. When she walked over to the jury, she didn't just read facts. She told a story. A story where Daniel wasn't a husband, but a man bending the law for his own comfort. Mark Hughes, Daniel's lawyer, pushed back. He rolled in a TV screen and began showing home videos. Sarah icing a birthday cake while the children sang, Miriam teaching the younger ones to read, Joy laughing on the porch with a newborn in her arms. "These," Hughes said, his voice calm but firm, "are not crimes. These are the everyday moments of a loving household." He pointed to the children in the videos. "The law may see this as numbers and violations, but these kids see it as home." The jury leaned forward. Some faces softened. But Miss Reynolds wasn't finished. She stood again. "Call Daniel Brooks to the stand." The room seemed to tilt as Daniel rose. His boots felt heavier with each step toward the witness chair. He swore to tell the truth, and sat, folding his hands to keep them from shaking. "Mr. Brooks," the prosecutor began, pacing slowly, "do you believe the law should bend for your personal choices?" Daniel paused. The courtroom went silent except for the faint buzz of a ceiling light. He could have given a careful, rehearsed answer. He could have dodged. But instead, he looked straight at her and said, "I believe the law should protect love, not punish it." A gasp swept through the gallery. A reporter's pen scratched furiously against paper. The judge, expression unreadable, leaned back and began writing notes in slow, deliberate strokes. And in that moment, everyone in the room knew, those words would either become the heartbeat of his defense, or the very rope that would hang his case. 3 weeks had crawled by since Daniel's testimony, but in his mind, they had passed like a blur. Every night, he replayed the prosecutor's questions in his head, wondering if there was a better answer he could have given. Every morning, he watched his wives put on brave smiles for the children, even though their eyes told a different story. And now, here they were, the final day. The courthouse felt colder than usual. Outside, the sky was bruised with heavy clouds, and rain hammered against the tall windows like impatient fists. People filed in with damp coats and umbrellas, muttering in hushed tones. Reporters, sensing the climax, had doubled in number. Their camera flashes lit up the hallway, as the Brooks family walked toward the courtroom doors. Inside, the sound of the bailiff's voice cut through the air. "All rise." The judge stepped in, his black robe swaying slightly as he took his seat. Every heart seemed to beat in sync, fast, nervous, expectant. The gallery quieted so much that the ticking of the wall clock felt deafening. The judge's voice was calm but heavy, like someone carrying an invisible burden. "Before I render judgment, I want to acknowledge the deeply personal and emotional nature of this case. The court understands that the decision today will affect not just the defendant, but an entire household." Daniel's hands clenched together on the table. Sarah's leg brushed against his, trembling. Then came the words Daniel had dreaded since the moment the summons arrived. "Mr. Brooks, this court finds you guilty of violating state marriage laws." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Leah, sitting just behind them, broke into quiet sobs, pressing a tissue to her face. Miriam's eyes filled instantly, but she stared straight ahead, as if refusing to give the cameras the satisfaction of her tears. Joy reached for Daniel's arm, gripping it tightly. The sentence came next, each word like a stone dropping into water, a fine probation, and most devastating of all, an order to dissolve all but one legal marriage. The family could still live together, the judge said. They could still share a home, raise their children, and hold to their faith. But in the eyes of the state, only one wife could remain real. The rest, legally invisible. Daniel lowered his head. It wasn't the fine, it wasn't even the probation. It was that piece of paper, the cold, lifeless decree, that cut the deepest. It felt like a piece of his heart had been torn away, not because it changed their love, but because it erased it in the eyes of the world. The law had looked at his life, weighed it, and declared, "This is wrong." And in that moment, Daniel realized something painful. This fight was bigger than him. This wasn't just about one man and his family. This was about every household that didn't fit neatly into the boxes the law had drawn. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. The vans with satellite dishes stopped parking on the gravel road outside the Brooks farmhouse. The neighbors went back to their routines, and the reporters found new stories to chase. But inside the Brooks home, the real storm had just begun. It wasn't loud or violent, no shouting, no slammed doors. Instead, it was a quiet, heavy kind of storm, one that settled over dinner tables and lingered in the silence before bed. The court had left them with an impossible choice: which marriage would stay legal, who would be the wife on record, while the others were erased by ink and statute. Daniel hated the thought. Each of his wives was more than a legal title. They were partners in raising children, keeping a home, building a life. How could the law ask him to measure love like a yardstick and choose? For nights, the question hung in the air. Sometimes it was unspoken, like a shadow in the room. Other times it slipped out in half sentences. Miriam would stir her tea and say softly, "Maybe it should be Sarah. She was first." Joy would shake her head. "That's not fair. We all came here knowing what this meant." Sheila would say nothing, but her eyes would fill with tears. Finally, one evening, they gathered in the living room. The children were upstairs, their laughter faint through the ceiling. The wives sat in a circle with Daniel in the middle, each woman holding one of his hands or resting a palm on his knee. "This is not about who I love most," Daniel began, his voice low. "It's about protecting the family from further harm." Sarah reached over and took Miriam's hand. "We all know this isn't about us fighting for a title. It's about keeping the family together. And if my name on that paper is what makes that easier, I'll do it." The decision was made together. Sarah would remain the legal spouse, while Miriam, Leah, and Joy would stay by love alone. It wasn't the ending Daniel dreamed of, but one warm evening, weeks later, he sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the children run barefoot across the yard. Fireflies flickered in the long grass. Laughter floated through the summer air. And Daniel realized something important. No judge could stop them from being a family in their hearts. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. Daniel began meeting with activists, lawyers, and other families who had faced similar battles. He spoke at small town halls, then larger community events. Cameras began to return, but this time it was because Daniel wanted them there. "Love is not a crime," he told the crowd at his first public speech after the trial. His voice carried beyond the microphone, firm and steady. "If the law can tell you who to love, it can also tell you when to stop. And that's not freedom." As the sun dipped below the horizon one evening, his youngest daughter climbed onto the porch swing beside him. She curled up under his arm, her hair smelling faintly of grass and sunshine. In the quiet she whispered, "We're still together, Daddy." Daniel smiled, a slow, grateful smile that seemed to erase weeks of strain. The law could draw lines on paper, it could stamp documents and issue orders, but it could never erase the bonds they had built. And as long as love remained at the center of their home, no courtroom in the world could truly break them.